Africa is generally inundated with brands from all over the world, and these brands tend to dominate our spaces, culture, shelves, wardrobes, and our homes. In Africa, foreign brands are so ubiquitous that some end up feeling African. But the truth is, most of these brands don't originate from the continent. And in contrast, brands that are from the continent are created, produced, and designed by Africans remain relatively unknown. Welcome to Scaling African Brands, a serious conversation shining a spotlight on African brands with the aim of inspiring and encouraging these brands to expand beyond our borders. Each episode is meant to teach, inspire, and encourage us towards one goal: to scale brands beyond the African borders. Scaling African Brands is brought to you by Advertising Week Africa in association with Advertising Week, which is a worldwide live event with footprint in London, Tokyo, Sydney, Mexico, and New York being the flagship and founding region. In this episode, we sit down with Doug Place, CMO of South Africa's most recognizable, iconic, and irreverent brands on the continent, Nando's. We discuss the origins of Nando's, how it expanded globally, and what led to its successful expansion beyond the African borders. The Kantar Brand Z study recently voted Nando's in the top 10 most valuable South African brands in 2021, and it was listed amongst banks, telcos, alcohol brands, and health insurers. This makes Nando's the only food brand in the top 10. It was also voted as the most respected company for their marketing and won the most valuable campaigns. Doug has the job that every CMO wants to have, and this makes him the most enviable CMO in South Africa. Dare I say Africa? Don't believe me? Doug was voted the most admired marketing professional in South Africa by Scopen's agency Scope Report. Good morning, Doug.
Morning. Nice to be here. Thanks and welcome to Flame Studio, Constitutional Hill.
Incredible venue.
Yeah, how about this, eh?
Thank you for giving it to us as an option. So this is the first episode of a series called Scaling African Brands, brought to you by Advertising Week. Wait for it. Africa.
Hey.
So Advertising Week exists as a global platform.
That's right.
There's events all around the world, creating conversations. There's New York. We're recently at the London event, and we're working towards Advertising Week Africa 2023.
Fantastic. I'm thrilled to hear it. I'm a big fan of Advertising Week. I've been a subscriber for a while. I've kind of followed their conference materials. And there's always been a part of me which is I wish there was slightly better representation.
Absolutely.
And Africa's very on trend at the moment. It's
Absolutely.
And for good reason, man. So let's get into it.
Say no more. That's why we're here. So I've got a couple of questions, but before we get into those questions, right?
Yeah.
I have to ask this question.
Right.
How does it feel to be the guy? When I say the guy,
ask the guy and he'll tell you. I'm not sure it's me.
So, and when I say the guy, what I mean is, one, I don't know any creative that doesn't want to work on Nando's.
Right. Wow.
I don't know any agency that doesn't want to have Nando's as part of their portfolio clients. I don't know any marketer who doesn't want to be at the helm of an iconic brand like Nando's. 4,
Wow.
every boardroom, literally every boardroom, we want to be like Nando's.
Sure. Can I take this guy as my hype man? Forget this. That's very generous of you to say thank you. Yeah.
5,
Oh wow, there's more. All right.
it goes beyond industry.
Okay.
Everyday South Africans love the brand.
Yeah.
Like everybody loves Nando's. How does it feel to be the guy?
Honestly, most days terrifying. Yeah, genuinely. It's I do have the best job in the world. I genuinely mean that. I've done this job this is my 7th year. How about that? I'm down to one written warning left, so I'm going to use it wisely. It's an incredible privilege. I know that's quite a cliched thing to say, but there are very few companies and brands in the world that have the degree of permission. I think that Nando's has. In fact, our biggest criticism is not that we cause offense or go too far. Our biggest criticism is when we do something that's lame.
Wow.
It's like, or it's boring, or a bit kind of expected, like what other brands have. So every day, I get to do this today, and come to this space. Now, this space we were in, Flame Studio, is in, I think, and I choose this word thoughtfully. It's a holy space, Constitutional Hill. This is a space that's held 3 Nobel Prize winners in captivity. It's the home of the world's best and most progressive constitution. It's the place that held firm against state capture. And so to be a brand that's even allowed to walk here and have conversations like this is incredibly intimidating, and it's a privilege and one that we want to honor. So hopefully we do that really well. It's a joy to be a part of it. A large part of that permission, I think, comes from who we are as a company and a brand. And you've just seen Mr. Brosen, Robbie, who's one of our co-founders. And when they got started, they didn't have any money to do conventional advertising. So a lot of the big brands, like this is, we're talking early 90s here, and a large portion of the South African narrative is quite similar to the African narrative, which is it's a story about big things that come here. What's now starting to be told is about big things here starting to go to the world. And so in the early 90s, they didn't have big McDonald's budgets or KFC budgets to kind of launch and build a brand. So they went to the advertising agency, then Hunter Scaris, and they said, listen, we don't have a lot of money to pay you, but what we can give you is permission to make the kind of work you've always wanted to make that other clients were perhaps too afraid to make. And so I think the word, John Hunt tells the story that Robbie said to him in the parking lot outside that first meeting outside Hunter Scaris. He says, I want you to shock me.
Wow.
It shocked me.
Wow.
And in many ways, whilst that brief has evolved somewhat over time, that we're still looking for that permission to make that work that other people are afraid to make. And so it's very scary, but a real privilege to continue in that tradition.
That's incredible. Do you think having the founders talk about the idea of agency, you have the permission?
Yeah.
Does that make a difference? Because usually we speak to CMOs, we speak to marketing teams who've joined the business. What difference does it make when you have access to the founder?
Yeah, sure.
And it gives you the permission to do whatever you want?
It's phenomenal. I think a lot of agencies, or a lot of clients, and I sit on, for example, the master board, and I do a lot of work in and around the marketing industry, and the big question now is, how do you find your purpose as a business? How do you make a difference in the world beyond just what you buy and sell on a daily basis? And we're really lucky now, as a lot of those values were conceived when we were born. And so to have founders for whom set the sails around courage and integrity and family and passion, those aren't just things you put on a mug or on the wall of the boardroom or a mouse pad. Those are really lived behaviors and values in our business. So it's expected of us to follow in those footsteps. And I think a large portion of the message that we have for today is this isn't unique to Nando's. And I think Africans and African brands in particular have a lot more permission than I think they recognize. The villain, as it were, is I don't think fear. Fear gets quite a bad rap, The villain is safety, because no one got fired for being average, ever. No one got fired for being safe, right? Or and a lot of the narrative you hear is, well, how do we avoid being cancelled on Twitter? How do we make work that is impactful, but reaches a vast majority of people, and how do we be average and save money, and how do we have a voice at the table? It's like, well, how much more permission do you need really to go out there and make a difference? And particularly young African people have the skills that the world desperately needs to answer that question. I truly believe. I mean, just have a look at where we are today. This is one example of hundreds of the institutionalization of taking that permission seriously. And lighting a torch for the world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love that thought. So working for a brand like Nando's, and you talk about permission and not being afraid.
Oh, I'm afraid. Let's be very clear. I'm afraid a lot. The question is, that doesn't mean it has the final word.
Yeah. Feel the fear, but do it anyways.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, Elizabeth Gilbert, is all. I mean, she wrote Eat, Pray, Love, but she wrote a better book called Big Magic. She says, fear's in the car with you, but it can only sit in the back seat and it can't choose the music.
Wow.
So
I
it's
love
always
that.
there,
I love that.
but it doesn't get to choose where you go.
Absolutely.
So listen, I'm not for a second saying that you shouldn't fear. Of course,
Yeah.
fear is very real, but
Yeah.
don't let it make the ad.
No, absolutely. Is that a Doug thing or is that a Nando's thing? Are you able to discern between yourself and the brand, or you've just become one thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm very aware of my own biases. I'm a white kid. I went to private school.
Mm-hmm.
Got this accent because I lived in the UK for 2 years. So I have been brought up to appreciate certain parts of culture, and there's a large portions of South Africa that I just don't understand or that are unfamiliar. So I think the challenge is being aware of those biases, not necessarily feeling guilty about them, but they're there, and I work with a community of people who are better than me in every possible way. So a large portion of what I do is frankly just get the fuck out the way.
Yeah,
Steve
yeah.
Jobs said, when they hired people at Apple, you don't hire strong people and then you tell them what to do. That's a waste of talent.
Exactly.
You hire them and just clear the obstacles so they can be who they were meant to be. So we do produce a huge amount of work which isn't for me. It doesn't necessarily resonate with me, and that's the point. That's half the challenge.
I love that.
Yeah.
Usually when, we get to interact with marketers, usually for the first 2 days, I always make sure that they know this principle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you're guided by a number of principles that help you navigate and make decisions. My thing is, it's never about the person at the helm. We've seen it so many times when new person comes in, everybody gravitates to their opinion and not necessarily what is right for the brand.
Yeah.
So I always say, we have to always do what's right for the brand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have this? I showed the ad to my maid and she really liked it. Do you ever have that as a feedback?
That's the worst.
That's the absolute worst. My kids don't understand the ad. Great.
Crazy.
That's not what
crazy.
that's about. No, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So before we get into the brand, what is your I read some of your articles where you spoke about the last one you did for I think it was around trends, where you spoke about that things don't change as much or as drastically as we think they do. Yeah. Do you mind just talking about one principle that you spoke about in that article?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for reading that. God, someone read it. That's great. I think marketers are prone to novelty. And I'm using marketers generally to include advertising people as well. We like new stuff and we like shiny stuff. And if you look at the content of big marketing conferences or articles that are published online, is they tend to focus on the new. And my experience has been, whilst the new is interesting, it's often oversold. So if you go back, 15 years ago, the narrative was around WAP. Remember WAP? WAP was like the first bit of internet on your cell phone. Like WAP was going to revolutionize like the media industry, and all brands.
Now nobody talks about WAP.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And what does Twitter mean for brand building? And we can see Twitter numbers dwindling and have done for a while. And now it's TikTok. And so TikTok is the new Twitter, and Twitter is the new WAP. So, the point I wanted to make around that is what drives human behavior is far more fundamental and universal than I think people give credit for. And so that which motivates us, that's what makes us excited or afraid or scared or feel that we belong to a community. Those trends and those insights are far harder to get to, but they're far more enduring than the latest and greatest trend and novelty. So my experience has been, if you're always chasing the latest, you are not necessarily giving yourself the opportunity to chase that which is fundamental. So, Nando's has been around for 35 years this year. And we didn't think we'd get to 35. We chatted to Robbie. There were some dark days in those moments. But a large portion of our business is well disposed to the prevailing trends which happen now. So I'm not saying that trends aren't important. I'll give you a couple. People are very conscious around what they eat now. Now, what you ate 5 or 6 years ago was determined by a diet. Now, a diet, has all the associations of loss. It's like all the things you can't have. Being on diet, it wasn't fun. It was often punishment. Now, the way you eat today reflects lifestyle choices and value judgments that you have around the world. So I'm not going to be a vegetarian because I'm on a diet. I'm a vegetarian because I believe certain things around animal welfare, about how much protein we can consume, etc. Now, one of those trends, if you look at the Nando's menu anywhere in the world, there's no funny stuff there. Like it's all real ingredients. It looks like a potato. It is a tomato. You can see in the basting the bits of garlic and chili that go there. There's no polony. There's no nuggets. What is a nugget made? Have you ever seen what part of the chicken does a nugget come from? Burger patties. Does anyone really actually know what's in a burger patty? So, and do you want to know? Whereas at Nando's we don't have any of that. So that's been that way since the beginning. And now we're increasingly on trend because we serve real, whole, and natural foods. We have vegetarian options, and in many parts of the world, including here in Africa, we'll have plant-based vegetarian options as well. So you do need to pay attention to those trends, but those trends are going to occupy today 1 or 2% of the total business. There's 98% that is far more real and fundamental. So that's the point I wanted to make in that article.
Fantastic. I love the fact that you touched on the product, which we'll get into. But take us back to the two co-founders. Just briefly, not into detail, but how did it start?
Right.
And then I just want to know, because with this idea of scaling African brands, right? You have a founder who has an idea. And I think there's so much value in being or having certain characteristics as a founder to drive whatever business or brand that you're building. If you look at guys like Richard Branson, how he built this humongous, iconic, Steve Jobs, all those guys. Even here at home, you have Theo, who's charismatic. He's always talking about why he started the shoe brand and all that stuff. If you can just describe to us how the business started.
Sure. But
then a little bit about the character of the co-founders.
Yeah, of course. So Robbie and Fernand started the brand quite late in their lives. They weren't sort of like teenagers in a garage, like that's the Silicon Valley story. And they were both working in an electronics repair business, fixing VCRs and telephones and those kinds of things. And Robbie had tried his hand at a few sort of entrepreneurial endeavors. I think he'd sold like phone books and toilet seat covers and stuff. Genuinely, that's the stuff.
Great.
And Fernando is a Portuguese immigrant. And so he took Robbie to a Portuguese restaurant called Chickenland in Rosettenville. And they were, doing what people do when you go out to lunch, mumbling about how crap their jobs were and the boss and this. And it's not that interesting to be in like electronics repair. And so they said, well, why don't we, we love this food. Why don't we just buy this restaurant? Because it's going to be better than working in an electronics repair store. So, they did two things which are fundamental to the business anyway, and you'll find this in Saudi Arabia, Nando's, and you'll find this in Chicago, and you'll find it here in Johannesburg as well. The first thing was they said, we're going to have fun, right, and hopefully make a little bit of money. Like those things. Now, if I'm not having fun, I'm not doing my job. If I'm not making money, I'm also not doing my job. Most people have the second, but you have to have that balance between have fun and making money. They also recognize that no one really goes to school so that they can work in a restaurant. Very few people do. It's like, what are you going to do after matric? I'm going to grill chicken. So they said, well, we want to create the best, because they knew what a bad employment experience was. So they wanted to design a good one. And so it's a foundational principle of Nando's. It's this idea of the people who make the chicken matter above all else. Because if you look after those people, they're going to cook the chicken well. And if you cook chicken well, that makes for a very happy customer. And if you have a very happy customer, then you have a very happy bank manager. Now, my experience has been of other companies that they try to make the bank manager happy first, and then you try force the customer agenda into that, and then you try put the employment experience into that. And now we have what's I'm going to tell you a dad joke. Okay, you ready for this? Have you heard of the Great Resignation? It's happening around the world. Like young people are going, listen, I just don't want to work in these big, like stuffy corporates. So there's this huge resignation, particularly in younger people who are saying, I just don't want to work this way anymore. It's called the Great Resignation. Here in South Africa, we call it the Resign Indaba. It's not that funny, but it's funny. I borrowed that from Fahim, who's heads up our agency, MSC Motshegwa. But so I think again, what's introduced to Nando's at the beginning was this idea of the people that make the chicken and looking after them, and those truths are carried into behaviors around the restaurants across the rest of the world. Now, if you want to scale an African brand, it was very early on. I think it was Fernando who said, "Listen, we're going to conquer America. We're still trying to conquer America."
Yeah.
What you needed then was to have a very specific vision.
Mm-hmm.
They needed a well-defined brand. We were going to be a Afro-Portuguese flame-grilled chicken brand. We weren't going to put beef burgers and ribs and other things on the menu. We were going to do one thing and we were going to be the best at it. And then critically to scale is they needed some committed partners to go with them. So they franchised the business because they didn't have the capital locally. So they sold sort of franchise rights here in South Africa and in many territories around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then partnered with some really serious investors who had a very similar vision and a similar set of values to them. And that was in the form of the Enthoven family. And so they scaled the business into places like the UK, which really took off in the late 90s, and then places like Australia. So those are the major markets for us at the moment, South Africa, Australia, and the UK. And then really strong growth markets like India and the US, and then some franchise businesses like we have in the Middle East and across Africa, Mauritius, and then Southeast Asia as well. So, the first 1,000 restaurants, Robbie said he'd build, and he did. So he stepped out of active management in around 2010, and has now taken on far more difficult and noble tasks, like trying to change the world through the work he's done with Goodbye Malaria. And there are a number of other fascinating initiatives which he bends my ear on regularly to get behind.
I love his energy. I think we're just privileged to have him in studio as we're about to begin. It's incredible. So you know what's interesting, right? You didn't mention a business plan.
Yeah.
I suppose it exists.
Of course, yeah.
But the driving elements and ingredients of building a brand, and I'm not saying a business plan is not important.
Yeah.
But the ethos and there's a deeper thing behind. Yes, it's chicken, but when you hear the story, it's not just chicken.
Of course not. Yeah. Yeah, it's the people who make the chicken. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
I think this is a uniquely African problem in my experience. And listen, I don't speak on behalf of all brands everywhere. But what you often find in Europe and particularly the US is the path to CEO is via the marketing function.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is it's the only function that can look forward. So like the accountant is, keeping a record of the transactions that have taken place. That's what financial statements are. They are dated by, when they took it. Now, I'm not saying that that's not important. It's critical to have a view of what the business looks like. And in that are clues for how it could be. But that's principally not the domain of the CFO. The operations director runs the business on a daily basis, and the HR and the IT functions are, enablers to that. And those are critical. You can't have a business without it. And they often, they don't get the kind of sexy airtime that marketing does, and they deserve it. But the marketing function is the only business that can say, this is how the world as it is today. And you can look at financial records, you can look at market research, you can look at market trends. There's lots of tools in that toolbox. But then you can say, well, how do we get from where we are today to where we are tomorrow? And you make that leap between the science of today and then the magic of tomorrow. So you've got to be a scientist as well as an artist. And, if you want to lead businesses, then you have to be able to lead the brand. So when you say there isn't a business plan, I think the business plan and the brand plan should be interchangeable terms.
Correct.
And so if the brand is the embodiment of all of the touch points of a business, then having a solid brand plan, as opposed to the brand plan needs to support the business plan. I've often heard that. It's like, I don't really understand that at all. And so, at Nando's, we're really fortunate that we are led, both the CEO of the South African business, the CEO of this, my boss, Jeff, who heads up he's a regional CEO, runs his licensed markets business in India as well. Both of them are marketing directors, which is massively inconvenient for me because I can't get away with stuff because they know they've been marketers. Yeah. But it's also hugely inspirational that they give, again, that word permission and latitude for the brand to lead the business. And then you can take things like supply chain and finance and operations, which kind of galvanize behind that brand plan and then chart the way forward, and that's been really successful for us. And again, that's not unique. That shouldn't be unique to Nando's.
Correct.
I think what you find in Africa is we have a fairly conservative mindset. So, you see businesses are run via accountants or operators, and there's some merit to that. But I think if we're going to get out of the space that we're in at the moment, we're going to require a lot more bravery and creativity, and that's more likely, I think, to come from the marketing function.
No, absolutely. When it comes to, which I think is something critical, right? Sometimes we often talk about brand, but what I really love about Nando's is that, in 2020 and 2021, the Kantar's Brandsies study of the most valuable brands in South Africa. What is so fascinating for me is to see Nando's in the top 10, which for me is like incredible. In that you have telcos, you have financial services.
Banks,
those guys are literally printing money.
Sure.
Literally.
Yeah.
And to see a brand like Nando's that sells chicken be there, for me speaks to the power of, I think the founder's vision as a pillar works really well. But I think also making sure that every piece or part of the business works really well, which I think is critical. Sometimes we neglect parts of the value chain, and
Sure.
How does Nando's continue to ensure that, yes, you do great marketing, which we'll speak about in a bit, but the experience is well curated.
Yeah.
The product is always on point. Whether I'm in Rosettenville, where the founders started, or I'm in Rosebank, or I'm in Kwamashu, that's a principle. How do you guys maintain that consistency?
Yeah, listen, we have a range of things called DFWs. The D stands for don't, and the W stands for with. I'm sure you can figure out what the F stands for. You asked me to keep it PG. So, and these DFWs are these are kind of principles, but which are unimpeachable. So, you look after your people first. So when you have a lockdown in 2020, which in South Africa was the fastest and most swift and brutal lockdown that any Nando's country, and 24 around the world, had experienced. We were given almost no notice for it. And the way that the government treated the restaurant sector largely was, in other parts of the world, you could still trade in delivery, for example. You could still run your drive-through. We weren't allowed to do any of that in South Africa. So what a lot of companies did, which is understandable, is to lay off staff, manage their suppliers, conserve cash, keep the business alive. It wasn't even a conversation in a meeting, and I was in a lot of meetings at that time where we were going to pay everyone in full. Here's the thing, everyone's going to get out of this alive and intact. We're not going to shut any restaurants, we're not going to close out any franchisees, we're going to pay all of our suppliers, we're going to pay our staff. Now that's really expensive to do that, but it's a DFW. And a value isn't a value until it costs you something, and that was costing us millions of rands every day. And so, if you have what those DFWs are, it does help because it gives you focus. And I'm sure we can make a great pizza. I'm sure we've got some unbelievably talented chefs who work for Nando's, but we're just never going to be a pizza brand ever. I'm sorry to break it to you. We're not going to have Nando's lasagna, right? As good as that product, I'm sure, can be. So being really focused gives us scale, and it makes us really distinct in the hearts and minds of consumers. Like, we are the world's best flame-grilled peri-peri chicken brand. That's true, as you say, from Kwamashu through to Chicago. The fact that the way in which what most people don't realize is half of my marketing spend is spent internally.
No.
It's spent on the employment experience of people, because the best billboard or the best TV ad in the world can't fix a crap restaurant experience. And so making sure that the people who make the chicken and work for us, I work for them, frankly. I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't for the restaurant. So there's no head office at Nando's. There's a central kitchen, and I work for central support because my job is a support function to the restaurants. Those things are, again, fundamental and foundational. So when you see head offices that get too important for themselves and everything about retaining the power of the CEO and the exec, it's like, well, then you lose focus of the people who work for you, and so you have the resign indaba, and more likely you have the this fracturing of doing things which don't really work for consumers either. So they don't care about your brand, they don't understand your values or your value proposition or what it is that they're paying for at the end of the day. So that's really helped as well. And then we have really sort of committed partners. So, the values that we have are held by everyone. And if you don't subscribe to those values, you're not going to have a good time at Nando's. You're not going to enjoy it. And lots of people do. We find is that people who work for us for less than 6 months or more than 10 years. So you work out very quickly how does the culture work here, what's important, and how do we navigate accordingly. So just to finish the lockdown story, for example, is when we were allowed to reopen, we reopened 300 stores here in South Africa in 6 days with a full fresh chicken supply chain. Wow. We don't sell frozen products. Now, most other restaurant brands took weeks to do that because you need to go and recruit and then train and then rehire and do the whole thing. Whereas everyone we had was, well taken care of at home, and because we'd looked after them, they were really, understandably, and I was one of them, grateful for that opportunity, and so they gave of their best. So we recovered really successfully through COVID, despite it being, truly the worst year in human history, certainly of our generation so far.
That's incredible. And I think as a business trying to grow, I think what you speaks to the idea of having systems in place, which I think is great. So, and I know where you first scaled out of South Africa was Ireland.
Yes, right, yeah. Ireland and Zimbabwe. Yeah.
Ireland and Zimbabwe. How it's a two-pronged question. Yeah. Firstly, what is it that you scale, right? Yeah, okay. So it's like, what are you scaling? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people have got businesses, they've got brands. How would you define the thing that you're scaling? And then secondly, how do you scale? What makes you go, I'm going to go to Zimbabwe or go to Ireland?
You're not going to you like the answer, but I don't think it was as thought out as that. We went to lots of places and it didn't work out. We were in the DRC, we were in Israel, we were in Portugal, and those territories didn't really work out for us. Now, whilst we still are scaling, I can tell you how we're approaching it now. So we opened in Saudi, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, I think in 2017. That was the latest sort of new part of the world that Nando's has shown up in. And what you're scaling is a unique brand, and so what you're looking for is points of difference and advantage. So there aren't any African restaurant brands in Saudi Arabia. In fact, there are not many anywhere across the world. There are a few. The Spur Corporation's been fairly successful in exporting their brand, Steers as well. But no one does chicken like we do. No one has a restaurant experience like we do. The fact that you can choose your basting, that was a fairly new thing in the world at the time. The way in which you order, for example, in the UK, what we had in the early 90s was you had fast food chains, so you can buy, chicken and chips, and then you take it away in a plastic or paper bag, or you had fine dining restaurants. So where sit at a table and a waiter brings you a menu and you order. And so what the leadership did there at the time, incredibly successfully, was to take what's best about fast food, which was relatively, attractive prices, food served quickly, and it's a known cost. You sit at a restaurant and go like, when that bill comes, how much is it going to be? You pay up front. So you have all of the benefits of fast food, but then we design, beautiful African restaurants that look and feel like this place. And so again, it's a point of difference. So it's interesting to people. It gives when you go to a restaurant, you are going to a different place. You're going to have an experience that you wouldn't otherwise have at home, for example. It's an adventure of sorts. And so when you walk into a Nando's in the UK, you're having all the benefits of a dine-in experience of real crockery and cutlery and music and art on the wall, but you have all the benefits of fast food as well, which are of known cost and relatively attractive. You wait a long time for the food. So we kind of, in many ways, pioneered this fast casual dining business concept, which is inherently scalable beyond just places like the UK. And so, looking at what makes you competitive relative to the market, what's the unmet need of the consumer, and how can you meet that need in a brand advantaged way, which gives you, as Warren Buffett would say, like a moat around your business. And then you just have to figure out how you can do that profitably. So, the equation very simply for brand value is what do I get divided by what do I pay. Now, you can be really predictable and just charge people less and discount. It's a good way to drive value. It does work. Yeah. But if all you're famous for as a brand is how cheap you are, There's not much brand value in that. So the better way and the harder way is to emphasize the top half of that equation, which is what are the things you get? Well, at Nando's, you get the world's best flame-grilled peri-peri chicken, served by people who love working for that brand. It was introduced to you via advertising, which wasn't irritating and intrusive. It was funny and humorous, and you wanted to tell people about it. It made you a little bit, wow, I can't believe they went there. It's food that's real, whole, and natural. There's no funny, weird stuff in it. I don't have to worry about what I'm eating, right? It's served to me in a way, often less than 10 minutes at a known cost on real crockery that's designed by South African designers. There's a whole bunch of things that you get at Nando's, which are points of difference and advantages that you wouldn't get at other restaurant brands. And so, again, finding the scalability of things like that means that you can cut and paste that across regions at relatively lower cost, but relatively high impact. And you need money, so you need investors. That matters too.
Interesting. I was just thinking about that peri-peri margarita pizza.
Nice idea.
One day.
Unlikely.
So like, what is the practical? So, okay, forget Ireland.
Yeah.
I'm in KZN. I want my brand to be in Gauteng, in Mpumalanga.
Yeah.
Maybe borrowing from the principles of what did they do? Using those principles, maybe to inspire or explain to people what are the steps that you take to move from KZN to expand to scale your brand starting in South Africa.
I think a lot depends on what your brand is. If your brand is a service brand, like an internet brand, for example, then you can scale pretty much anywhere courtesy of the internet. So if you're launching the South African version of Instagram, you're not going to necessarily bound geographically. If you're selling shoes which are manufactured in KZN, then you need to take into consideration your supply chain. So the further away you are from your factory, the higher the cost is going to be to sell the product somewhere else. And so you need a full supply chain kind of solution for that. The practicalities are, before entering into a market, is what's the competitive landscape? What's the maturity of the market? Are they ready for this? It's like Saudi Arabia was not ready for any Western brands, let alone restaurant brands, 10, 15 years ago. They now are increasingly more sort of progressive in their adoption of mostly Western cultures and influences. So your market timing needs to be accurate. Based on the competitive landscape, can you win there? And win with consumers and win relative to the competition? It's nice to have no competitors, but it's not always best. So, for example, the Nando stores that do the best are in close proximity to other chicken brands. Because it means there's obviously a market there. Where there's just one standalone Nando's and no other kind of restaurant brands around it, that tends not to do particularly well. So it's not a total case of, greenfields. Greenfields means you then have to develop the whole market and your whole category, not just your brand within that. So you want to probably consider those things as well. You want to look at the, how economically robust that community is. Can they afford to pay the prices you need to charge in order to make your business successful? And that's a trade-off between kind of volume and value. And you have there's textbooks written on pricing, but you want to, what's the most you can charge based on what's the most that they're prepared to pay for the goods and services you're prepared to render, and then manage that accordingly. And then do you have security and longevity around that? What are the things that can blow you up? Is there kind of government regulation? Is there going to be changes in consumer attitudes and behaviors? I remember like the frozen yogurt trend from 5 years ago, but more probably 10 years ago. I was in the cinema business then, and like frozen yogurt was hot, man. Everyone had a frozen yogurt brand, and so we got involved in frozen yogurt, and it died within 18 months. Like no one really cared. So you still find bits of it, but like you want to make sure you're not in frozen yogurt in 2022. So is there your business model sustainable? Is there, and again it comes back to that trend article. It's like, is this a trend or a fad, or this is a deep and enduring consumer need that we're meeting? And so, you want to make sure that your brand is appropriate for that. And then it takes enormous courage and an absence of arrogance, because no one's like waiting for you just to arrive. So where we've screwed up, and listen, Nando's has screwed lots of things up. It's like we've opened a restaurant in a new community and go like, we're here. You've been waiting for us. And I was like, who are you? What do you sell? What's this thing all about? We just had to do that in India about 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, India is the world's fastest growing restaurant market. I mean, got 1.2 billion people.
Crazy.
Like, I don't think you know how big that is. Let me tell you how big this is. This is a cool stat. In the last 3 months, the population growth of India is the same as the total population of New Zealand.
Wow.
In 3 months, they've made an entire New Zealand.
Crazy.
So it's an enormous market. And so, we're participating as a brand there. But for many people, they were unclear of what is Nando's, what do you sell? And because you don't know those two things, your prices look expensive. Because in the absence of that value equation, what do I get to buy? But if you don't know what I get, then everything looks expensive. So we had to, effectively go back to the fundamentals of who we are, how we show up in the world, and why this is, the world's best, chicken brand. And that was a business turnaround strategy, conceived and executed by the marketing team. And like in my career, that's one of the top highlights for me was introducing the world's biggest and fastest growing restaurant segment to the best South African brand.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I love your answer. Because, it means you have to do the work.
Yeah.
There's a lot to do, research and all that kind of stuff. But, fittingly, we are at Cornhill Flame Studios. We live in South Africa.
Yeah.
I loved your intro where you were honest, saying you're born privileged, you're quite privileged.
Oh God, yeah.
And we know in South Africa, there are a lot of people who are not privileged, who are disadvantaged, mostly black.
Yeah.
So I love the theory of, scaling African brands. You can do this. But then there are those realities where a lot of black entrepreneurs, small businesses face.
Sure.
What do you think should be done to help harness or stimulate small businesses so that they can be able to scale and grow?
Yeah, that's... there's two
it might be
answers
an
to
unfair question.
Yeah,
but
no, it's the question.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be clear. Like, nothing's going to happen unless we win that.
Correct.
In the history of South Africa, the history has very rarely been made by politicians or institutions.
Correct.
We like to believe that's the case.
Correct.
I think when we spoke, when you asked me to come do this, there's this myth that we're waiting for some kind of savior to do stuff. We want Nelson Mandela II to come and lead us into a promised land.
Correct.
And taking nothing away from the greatest president ever, a large portion of that success of overcoming this institutional evil without combat, without bloodshed and genocide, which is the traditional African story, was because millions and millions of people believed in the values and the opportunity to make a difference in day-to-day life. So that's still very true of South Africans. So if the entrepreneur doesn't win, then that says a lot about the society and the conditions which we create. Now, they're not going to win because some blesser is going to come out of the sky and give them a pile of money, and then that's how it's going to be. I mean, notice in my previous question, I didn't mention advertising in terms of scaling a brand. Like, you have to do it, but it's way more important to have a good, sound business design. So, at Nando's, 99% of that which we buy through our supply chain comes from South Africa, from the light fittings through to the chicken and the peri-peri. So it's Southern African, in its because we're hugely passionate. Now, we can buy cheaper stuff in the Far East. Most people do, but we deeply believe in the value of South African businesses, not because we're charitable and want to be seen as virtuous and nice, but like, it's genuinely valuable. People value this kind of architecture and this kind of art and this kind of chicken. That's why they're prepared to pay more for our chicken than they pay for other chicken brands, because they do value it. So I think there has to be some public and private partnership development as well. It's really difficult to run any business if you don't have power, or the roads that you drive on are filled with potholes. It's very, very difficult, big and small business, to be successful. So, we do need government to administrate, right? Not be in power, but to use that power to the benefit of the people. And increasingly, worryingly, you're seeing young people they just have no faith in government whatsoever. They don't even vote in elections. They're not even upset anymore. They just don't believe that any help is going to come from there, and maybe they're right. So it has to start at a grassroots level, and it has to grow. And there are lots of brilliant examples about this. I mean, this Flame Studio is, I think, an iconic space because this is a place of enormous pain. Like the institutional evil that took place underneath our feet here is astonishing. We're sitting like in a munitions depot. So like this, like we used to keep bombs and guns and cannons here to oppress people. It's like, and that's where the English started, and then became the Boers, and now it's not that. And yet we've somehow turned this place of great pain into a beacon on a hill where we have the world's best constitutional democracy. And I didn't say that. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that. When the Arab Spring happened in Egypt, and the Egyptian, the incoming government went to America to get some lessons on how do you draft a progressive constitution, they said, don't come here, go to South Africa. Like that document's better. And so, I think we have to live up to the values of this constitution and this place, and not be, victims of history and victims of circumstance, although there are good reasons to be victims. Of course they are. But you can't let it have the final word on it. And so, seizing the entrepreneurial opportunities, and there are many, and you can see, particularly with immigrant communities that come to South Africa, they see the opportunities, and, you can see the bubbling up xenophobia in communities of like, well, these people are taking our jobs. As well, these people are also taking the opportunities that are presented to them because they have to survive. And so, if we can learn from that and work together with them, then I think we're going to, there are 100 of Nando's businesses out there that are where we were in 1987. No question. We're seeing this all over the world. So I'm really excited and hopeful for it. But it's going to take a lot of investment and thoughtfulness from the private sector. The government's going to have to be the government. And I think the level of creativity and resilience that we have as a community, I'm not just talking about the last 30 years. It's like this place is filled with reasons to give up and be crap for hundreds of years. And yet, as Martin Luther King says, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice and mercy, and that's true here. It's still better to be born in South Africa in 2022 than it was in 1962, and definitely better than 1862, and unquestionably better than 1662. So I'm not taking away or being too sentimental about things. It's very real. It's really hard and gross. It's unforgivable that we have 78% youth unemployment in South Africa, and that's obscene. I mean, America's just gone to 5% unemployment, and everyone is freaking out. We're at 78 for young people. And if we don't address that, we're going to have a lot more riots and a lot more discontent and a lot more people suffering needlessly when we have inherent resources here in the form of arts and culture and creativity that the rest of the world just doesn't have. And then we have more conventional resources. I mean, if you look at the top 10 biggest gold mines in the world, 10 of them are here.
Wow.
Like all 10 are here.
Crazy.
And as the world, it deals with, collapsing stock markets of tech stocks. I mean, Netflix is now worth 30% of what it was 2 months ago. Airbnb similar, Twitter the same. Gold is still valuable to people. So there's this move towards commodities. So we are best positioned to deliver this. And what happened this week is the Moody's rating agency upgraded our investment status for the first time in almost a decade.
Crazy.
Like, there's lots of good reasons to be excited and hopeful about this. The potential is here. That's not what's difficult. And if you look at like case studies in places like Rwanda, and after a genocide of a million people dying in 100 days in the early 90s, in a landlocked country that has basically gorillas and coffee. That's all they have to sell, and they are now one of the most successful democracies.
Absolutely.
So there are blueprints for this.
Correct.
So. Sorry for my sermon, but
needed.
Well, I need more amens then. The reason is like you can't stay in the victimhood mentality, although you have good reason to do so. That has to be a comma. It can't be a full stop. And listen, we're open to ideas on how that can work.
No, absolutely.
We have to.
No, absolutely.
We have to.
Yeah, no. On a more lighter note, before we close off, you spoke about how sort of like your blueprint when we were speaking didn't include advertising, but it does form a critical part of there's no way we cannot talk about advertising. And you speak about South Africa and how the Nando's brand was built on tapping into what's happening politically, socially, so I always find it interesting when every marketer is like, we want to be like Nando's.
Right.
What is the thinking around the kind of work that you do? Is it a template? In fact, these days I find that the Twitterverse beat you to it sometimes.
Yeah, you're right.
Something happens and
No,
then it's like they're the best. They're the best, right?
Yeah.
So how did you guys get it right? And my theory, part of it is that this idea of consistency.
Sure.
Having consistency in, staying in your lane and doing this thing over and over, obviously with novelty.
Yeah.
You speak about focusing on chicken and not doing peri peri margarita pizza, just doing chicken the best that you can. And I think that almost transfers into the work that you do from a marketing perspective or advertising perspective. How do you guys do it?
It's hard because every ad is new. We start at zero, like everyone does. We all start with the same blank page. We do have a lot of permission as we started this podcast with, and there is a legacy of it. And I said the biggest criticism is that if we're boring, we don't live up to our own reputation. That's by far the number one most painful criticism that we endure. And that was originally conceived, again, out of deficit. We didn't have money, so we couldn't afford to buy huge media ratings. So we made the most impactful work we could so that it could get the message out as quick and fast as it possibly can, because we couldn't afford to flight it for 3 to 6 months. So that meant sometimes, dealing with controversial topics, because human biology is hugely attracted to controversy and to interesting things. Our monkey minds love that stuff. So I suppose you could say we were memes before there were memes, and there was viral advertising before it became. Did you ever get like a brief? Hey, we want a viral. I didn't know how to make a viral ad.
Every brief contained that line.
Really?
We want to go viral.
Yeah, sure. Well, if you do, then you have to risk. And to your point, you have to be consistent with that. Now, one of the misunderstandings that's quite common is people assume we love controversy. We look for it, and we don't. In fact, we look for the opposite. So controversy is, by definition, where people don't agree about something. So if you say Donald Trump is a great president, it's like lots of people don't agree with that statement. Lots of people do agree with that statement. That's why they voted for him. So that's controversial. So a lot of what we're looking for is for what's the biggest and broadest consensus on the matter.
Okay.
And so where do most people agree? Should the ANC be in power or not? I don't know. Most people think they should. That's why they keep getting voted in. What most people can agree with, however, is that we want a government that serves the people. Now, we're undecided on which kind of government is best suited to do that, but everybody wants that. So load shedding pisses everyone off.
Correct.
Everyone's upset by potholes. So you can talk about those things. That brings then people together. Now, if you talk about what is often painful, people are not always painful. But if you bring these things which people really they have a strong emotion to, and you make them laugh about it without undermining the severity of that situation, right? There's nothing inherently funny about load shedding. It's really inconvenient, bad for the economy, and most people suffer as a result from it. But if you can show them the lighter side of it, so we just launched this Bright Sides campaign on our app. It's like, depending on the stage of load shedding, it will depend on how many free sides we'll give with your meal.
Wow.
So if it's stage 2, you get 2 free sides.
Wow.
So now people are now looking forward to load shedding.
Exactly. See what you've started now?
Yeah. So, but that's not a new idea, really. That's an old. That's a new expression of something old, which is if you can help people to laugh at that which they have a strong feeling about, it doesn't make it so painful. And South Africans are very good at that. We're inherently a funny nation. We love laughing, and so laughing gives things perspective. It doesn't make it. It kind of defangs the snake a little bit, takes the poison out, and it gives you perspective. And allows you to kind of to continue. And as long as you're not laughing cynically or it's bitter, and it's true, then people like it. So, we are often credited for being creative. In fact, we're not creative at all. We're just good listeners. So if you listen to kind of what's going on and you play that back to people in a slick and a smart and a funny and a South African way, the best thing I can hear from people when they see our ads, other than I'm buying Nando's, is you're right. that's exactly how I feel.
Correct.
It's like,
Correct.
it's so true. I hadn't thought of it that way, but
Correct.
it's true. So you take that unconscious truth and you make it conscious through the advertising. So if you ask for a template, that's the template. Now, that shouldn't be unique to Nando's. But every brand should be unearthing these insights. And then,
Correct.
you know, the reason a business exists is because it solves a problem for people.
Correct.
You usually have
Correct.
like car brands. It's because people have cars that need, you know, need to get from A to B. So if you are a solution to a problem, then be that solution. Be the best solution you can possibly be. And I think that's the kind of template that we're aiming at. So that does mean, in order to be interesting, we're going to go to places other people aren't prepared to go.
Correct.
We just made this commercial recently for, it was Easter time. So when Easter, we know families get together and share bigger meals. So you don't sell a lot of burgers at Easter time, but you share the big sort of sharing meals. So we had this...
They're coming.
Yeah, exactly. This campaign idea of they're coming. Whereas, you know, we as a country and a culture are dealing with the fact that gender pronouns aren't what they used to be. So straight away you go, are you sure you want to go there?
Yeah.
Are you sure are we woke now? Is woke a good thing? Is woke a bad? So there's lots of opportunities for controversy.
Correct.
But there's also lots of opportunities for, well, you know, both sides of that important debate, you know, can come together on the fact that they are coming. And what does that really mean for people? And what is the African experience of that? And so, you know, the commercial very simply is around, you know, this little girl who tells a gogo that Ntabi says they are coming for lunch. And so Gogo thinks, gosh, there must be loads of them. So she prepares this huge, big Nando's feast for people, and then the door rings, and it's just Ntabi. She says, well, I thought you said they were coming.
They're here.
And she says, yeah, no, they. So, and again, you know, that's not an ad for me. I needed to learn all about what Kiana they. How does that whole thing work?
Correct.
And like, that speaks to both sides of the debate, which is they are coming. It's prone to some misunderstandings, which could be humorous. We're not laughing at anybody.
Correct.
We're laughing with people.
Correct.
And I think a lot of other brands are more likely to play it safe. And so, you know, I think, you know, safety is guaranteed failure. And so, listen, I didn't sleep for 2 nights before we launched that ad. I mean, I was terrified.
Amazing.
That's normally the case. But that's not normally, like, I suppose, a good sign that you're making work that hasn't been made yet.
Correct. I love what you said, that you knew nothing. You almost had to step back.
Yeah.
Which almost anchors the point that I made about it's not about you.
Definitely not.
You know, sometimes you have to let the work be the work.
Yeah.
But sometimes you get marketers, you know, meddling in.
Oh, I do that. I do meddle. Yeah, I've ruined lots of ads. Ask the agency.
Yeah. So just quickly.
Yes.
How do you top line, like your relationship with the agency?
Yes.
How do you guys get it? Like, do they come with proactive ideas? Do you brief? How does?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
How does it work for you? Like, because I think the hallmark of great work is this strong foundation between, you know, for both the agency and client to stand on, to create that relationship where you totally get each other.
Yeah, sure.
How do you guys foster that? How do you get it right?
You have to be prepared to fight. So
fighting is good, but I feel like sometimes it's shunned upon. It's like
exactly.
We shouldn't be fighting.
Yeah, here's what people think. They think collaboration means the absence of conflict.
Correct.
It's like, no, collaboration is the presence of conflict.
Now you're preaching.
Yeah, thank you. And so there are things that the agency can do that we'll never be able to do, and there are things that we can do that the agency can't do. So you're like two bits of a broken eggshell, as my boss would say. So
love that analogy. Yeah.
To come together and you fit. So. It's intentionally, we try and avoid hierarchies. So it's not like the ECD's idea is the best one and the CMO's idea is the best one. Often the best work comes from, you know, junior people who make their first ads. I think Write My Name was done by an intern at the time. So there's lots of examples of that. So everyone has equal voice in that room in terms of, you know, offering creative ideas, and you need to have the ego strength to sit aside and go, not for me, I don't understand it and I don't like it, but that's just me. And do you therefore trust the agency, you know, like that they add enormous amounts of trust, that this is true and relevant and going to resonate with people, and it really did. And so you build that trust over time, but by the same time you can't delegate your trust. You can't just go like, The agency are based it, so I'm gonna give them my business objectives and a pile of money, and then I'm gonna beat them up if they don't sell stuff. It's like, well, that's not a partnership at all. That's just you delegating your responsibility as a marketer. So there is this acknowledgement of what are you both independently good at, but then how can those two things best sort of fit together. So we do one of two ways. I'm summarizing for effect. We know what the plans are for the years ahead, so we know we're going to be doing these kinds of meals at this point of year. We've got an app launch here. We've got some interesting new news with load shedding in winter because we know we're going to get it. So there are things that we know are going to happen that they can work towards. And then there's a portion of it, which we call make room for crazy, which is we don't know what's going to happen, but things are going to happen. It's South Africa. It's guaranteed. And then do we have the resources available to be responding in that moment? So those kind of tactical ideas of something happens in the morning and we have an ad by lunchtime are still very much, that's one of the funner parts of the job. And those ideas can come from anyone, from the secretary to the CEO. And to your point, now it's a race against Twitter. I mean, if you don't believe South Africans are creative, just go to Twitter.
Absolutely.
And militant. So I think one of the interesting challenges we have is we get fake ads now. So people make their own Nando's ad. They try to clone the font. Now that font is a hand-painted sign font from a Mozambican sign writer. So it doesn't exist on a computer. It's literally done by hand. But people are kind of getting better and better at cloning it and then making ads on our behalf, which we're really flattered by. Because it shows how important we are to people. I'd be way more worried if they stopped doing it.
Absolutely.
But often
on that note, I think Nando's is literally... If there are, people can name the other brands, but I think Nando's is the only brand, I think, I actually wrote a piece about it, that this is the only brand where people expect a brand to say something. Generally, we don't care. Whether, Coca-Cola, we don't care. Right? But we expect and we want Nando's to say something, which I think is a great advantage. Because the battle is trying to get people's attention. But then you inherently have people's attention. I think it's just a phenomenal position to be in.
Really, really lucky. And that's not an accident. And the reason it's not an accident is we want to be a brand that is within for people. Like, we care about the things that you care about. And we want to go out of our way to demonstrate that. So when, we win a sports trophy, we're just as proud about that.
Correct.
When something bad happens, like, we're just as upset and angry about that. When people like Desmond Tutu pass away, like, we also grieve with you in that. So we want to demonstrate every day and all day, and we do this via the medium of advertising, but not exclusively that, to show that we're within for people. That's what's known as brand relevance. A lot of other brands only want to show up when they think they can make money from that moment. And I understand that. That's not a criticism, but it's quite a linear, quite a small opportunity. It's like, now you've arrived because I'm hungry. It's like, you just pitched up because now I want to buy a new car, so now you're interested in me. But like, when I'm not in the car market, you don't care about me. And so, a large portion of what we're trying to do there is just to be within for people. It also helps us because it means we're closer to them and the things that they care about, so we can respond to that. And I say that's not creative; it's just good listening. And this country's got some exciting places to go, and the continent's got an exciting place to go, and we want a front row seat to that. We don't want to be bystanders. Oh, hell no.
Amazing. Well, before you close, I just want to say I think it's incredible. Congratulations on being the number one CMO in the country, which I think is phenomenal, and your brand as well. I think that's why I feel like you're the guy. It's like everybody's envious of
Stop.
But quickly, top 3 things that marketers should be thinking about to become better. And not to say they aren't. I think there's always room for improvement. But as you are the brand and the person at the helm who everybody sort of like is envious of or wants to try to emulate, what are the top 3 things as a marketer? Like, if you do 1, 2, 3, you should be on your way. And then to close off, just a message for our youth, for Youth Month.
Okay, perfect. So 3 things. You've caught me at the top of my head. If you ask me in an hour's time, I'll have 3 different things. But these are 3 things that are in my head at the moment. Number 1, run towards chaos. Right? Don't run away from it. Every religious text in the world, whether it's the Bhagavad Gita or the Hebrew Bible or the myth of Gilgamesh, all of them tell the creation story as the move from chaos to order.
Mm.
So creativity, by its very definition, is the harnessing of chaos.
Nice.
So we're living in incredibly chaotic times. It's probably going to be chaotic for the foreseeable future. This isn't going to be done by Christmas. We're going to be in this for a while still. So marketers, in particular, are best positioned to take advantage of that chaos and make something out of it. What you don't want to do is run away from it and wait for it to blow over. When this COVID thing's finished, when the elections are done, when the war in Ukraine's over, it's like then we'll do work. It's like no. Your work is now to embrace the chaos. That is the creative act.
Fantastic.
Number 2 is marketers should be better at business, not just advertising.
Amen.
So a large part of what we've spoken about now is understand the consequence that your profession has on the broader business. Go to school about that. Marketers should be doing MBAs and accounting degrees as well, not just certificates in digital media management. Right? So, marketing means business. And so good marketing is felt by its presence. It's also felt by its absence. And if a business is suffering, it's almost always because the marketing is not good. So that's the second. And the third of which is, and this is going to sound sentimental, but yes, this is difficult. Be kind. Right? People are going through the most. Right? Most people are struggling just to get through the day. And that's not just, if that's not physical health, it's mental health, it's societal pressure. I look at the research statistics that we look at, and it terrifies me what particularly young people are enduring. If you spoke to a young person 10 years ago and say, what are your hopes and dreams for the future? They'd tell you, I want to be famous, I'm going to have my side hustle, I'm going to be a billionaire, I want to have a yacht, I want to be like Elon Musk, or it probably wasn't Elon at the time, it was probably Mark Shuttleworth. If you ask young people now, and we did quite recently, like, what are you hopeful for? What are you aiming at? They're hoping for, wait for this, like a 2-bedroom Samarkand house and a strong internet connection. Like, they want to be safe. It's like they don't have big hopes and dreams and aspirations. They just want to be left alone and be safe. And that is hugely concerning. So as a marketer, just be kind and empathetic to that. Right, and that's really difficult to do. At Nando's we pay our staff 65% more than the government mandated living wage. Right, it's our most expensive thing we spend money on is people, and we do that because we know that working in a restaurant's not everyone's,
Correct.
best dream for themselves.
Correct.
They're also supporting families who are supporting other families. But if you do that, then people are more likely to love and work for your business. They're less likely to behave badly and steal and not pitch up to work and treat customers badly. It means they're less likely to leave. So all of the money we would have spent on hiring, recruiting, and training, and all of those things, we've put into paying the people who work for us. So our staff turnover is a third of the industry average. So it does pay. It does make good business sense. That's rule number 2: be good at business. Being kind doesn't mean you should just be charitable and give stuff away. It's like no, do that thoughtfully. So those are my top 3 things.
The third one is my favorite.
Right.
Being kind.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's unimaginably difficult. We think, that's what Sunday school's about. Like, you learn to be kind and nice and say please and thank you.
And it should be like, it's a no-brainer, but it's like crazy.
Well, here's the thing. It's like it's not a value until it costs you something. Like, try be kind and see how expensive being kind is. it's unimaginably expensive.
I love that. And then to close off, just a message to the youth of South Africa leading up. I'm sure you're going to have a campaign for June 16. Right?
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. So what would be your message? And obviously the youth is quite broad, and I think it's the youth that are trying to build businesses and scale, but your message doesn't necessarily have to be linked to businesses, but what would be your parting shot?
Well, one of the things I'd say, I'm sorry, like we haven't been really good and effective for young people. We haven't made it easy for them. For the first time in many generations, young people are going to be poorer than their parents. Like that's bullshit, frankly, and I'm really sorry that that's the case. So I'm sorry if we've been a part of that in any meaningful way. So I'll start with that. The second thing is I'd say all progress, all of it comes from young people. That's history. History is made by young people, and young people who are smart and talented and brave enough to come together to say, in the presence of bad, how can we bring some good here? That's the June 16th story. Like that could have been the full stop. That that's a day of great suffering, but it's also, we've made it, like this place, into a day of great triumph, because what those youth marched for has come to pass. That's the final story, and so I would encourage them not to give up. and we're cheering you on in ways that are really important to us and hopefully important to you. And back yourself. You're gonna screw a lot of things up. You're gonna get hurt. You're gonna get bruised. You're gonna get disappointed. But you have to keep going, because that's how history is made. And I trust history, and I trust young people that we're gonna be fine. We're gonna get through this. It's not probably gonna happen by Christmas, but if you think over the next 15 to 20 years, all of the great inventions happened by young people and because of young people. So we're with you, and we're behind you, and we're cheering you on. So for heaven's sake, on behalf of Nando's, fire it up.
Fire it up.
There we go.
Amazing. I love you, man.
Love you. Thank you.
Well, it's been great. Scaling African Brands, brought to you by Advertising Week Africa. Doug, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.